There is a photograph that still hangs in the front room of a farmhouse outside Tuscumbia, Alabama, and in it a boy of 10 is standing knee-deep in a hole. He has dug in the middle of a perfectly good field, holding a clay pot, looking directly into the camera with an expression that can only be described as impatient. Impatient to get back to work. His mother took that picture in the last week of February. She took it because she thought it was funny. Nobody in Colbert County thought it was anything but funny. Ellis Farrow, 10 years old, out in the vegetable rows on his grandfather's place, digging holes and setting old clay pots down into them and covering them back over, so that only the necks stuck up out of the dirt like little chimneys. He did it for 6 weeks. He put in over 200 of them. Buster Rhymes, who hauled produce for half the county, and who had known that family for 30 years, drove past the field one morning and pulled over and looked at it for a full minute and then drove on shaking his head. He told people at the packing shed that the Farrow boy had planted a graveyard. The name stuck. All that springs, people called it the graveyard. Ellis never once explained what he was doing. Not to Buster, not to his mother, not to the men who leaned over the fence and asked him. 4 months later, in the worst dry spell that county had seen in 22 years, those 200 clay pots would be the reason his grandfather's vegetables were the only ones for 11 miles in any direction still standing green. If stories of patience, hard work, and the kind of wisdom that only the land can teach mean something to you, subscribe and join our farming family. Tell us in the comments where in the world you are watching from tonight. We would love to know how far this story reaches. Colbert County sits in the northwest corner of Alabama, where the Tennessee River comes through wide and slow. Cotton country once. Vegetable country now, in patches. The Farrow place was one of those patches, 38 acres on a rise above the river bottom, worked by Cleophas Farrow, 71 years old, who had been putting seed in that ground since he was 11 himself. He grew for the roadside and for 2 grocers in Sheffield, tomatoes, okra, field peas, sweet corn, greens in the fall. He was known in that county for tomatoes, and known for being difficult about them, and both of those things were fair. His daughter Marlene had come back to the farm with her son after her marriage ended in Birmingham. She kept the books, drove the deliveries, and worried quietly about how long her father could keep doing what he was doing. Ellis was the only child on a farm full of adults, and he grew up the way those children do. Watchful, serious, comfortable in silence. He was not a strong boy. He was not a fast one. What he was, and what his grandfather noticed before anybody else did, was a boy who would stand at the end of a row and study it for 20 minutes before he touched anything in it. Cleophas once told Marlene the child did not work like a child. He worked like an old man who happened to be short. The trouble had been coming for years, and everybody had been pretending it was not. The county had gone through 3 consecutive summers of rainfall well below normal. Not drought, not officially. Just less. A little less every year. Wells drawn down, the river low. Advisories going out in July asking people to go easy. Cleophas had a well and a pump and a run of overhead sprinklers he had bought used in 1988, and every summer he ran that system harder and got less out of it. The water went up into the air, and a great deal of it never came back down onto anything that needed it. And what did landed on hot soil in the wind, and most of it went right back up into the sky within a day. Cleophas knew this. Every farmer in that county knew it. They had accepted it the way you accept weather because the alternative was equipment none of them could afford. Ellis did not accept it. He was 10 and he had not yet learned which problems you are supposed to leave alone. The idea came from a woman named Prudence Vance. Prudence had taught 4th grade in Tuscumbia for 31 years and had retired to a house on the county road with more books in it than the school library had. Marlene cleaned that house on Saturdays, and Ellis came along, and Prudence did what teachers do, which is that she put a book in his hands within 10 minutes of meeting him. He kept coming back. She kept handing him books. One Saturday that November she pulled down a heavy old volume on the agriculture of the ancient world, opened it to a chapter she thought he would like, and went to make coffee. When she came back he had not moved. The page was about a practice from China and North Africa, and parts of the Middle East that goes back at least 2,000 years, and possibly a great deal further. Unglazed clay vessels, buried in the soil among the plants, filled with water, and left. The book called it Ola irrigation. It said the technique had been documented in Chinese agricultural texts around the 1st century, that variations had been used continuously in dry regions ever since, and that in controlled comparisons, it delivered yields comparable to conventional irrigation, while using as little as 1/10 of the water. 1/10. He read that chapter 4 times that afternoon. Prudence eventually stopped trying to talk to him and just let him read. When he was done, he asked her whether a clay pot from a garden center would work the same way. She told him honestly that she did not know. Then she told him something he remembered longer than anything else she ever said to him. The reason nobody uses this anymore is not that it stopped working. It is that it is slow and quiet, and it does not look like progress. And a thing that does not look like progress is very hard for people to take seriously, no matter how well it works. Then she gave him the book. The science of it is simple, and it is beautiful, and it is the reason the technique has survived for 2,000 years. An unglazed clay pot is porous. Water inside it does not sit still. It moves slowly through the wall of the vessel by capillary action, at a rate that is not constant, but that responds directly to the moisture level of the soil pressing against the outside of the pot. When the surrounding soil is wet, the pressure differential is low and almost no water passes through. When the surrounding soil dries, the differential rises and the pot releases more. The plant, in other words, sets the rate. The pot does not water on a schedule, it waters on demand. And because the vessel is buried, with only the neck exposed and capped, there is no evaporation from an open surface, no water thrown into hot air, no runoff, and no wet soil baking in the sun. Roots find the pot within a season. They wrap the outside of it, and they grow deep instead of shallow, because deep is where the water is. That is the entire technology. A porous jar, buried, filled, covered. No pump, no pressure, no power, no fuel, and it will run for as long as somebody walks the row once or twice a week and tops it up. Ellis Farrow understood every part of this before his 11th birthday, and he did not tell one single person. He started in January with money he did not have. He bought 40 unglazed terracotta pots from a garden supply in Muscle Shoals, with okra money, and he learned within a week that he had bought the wrong thing, because a modern flower pot has a drainage hole in the bottom, and a jar full of water with a hole in the bottom is not an irrigation device, it is a leak. He plugged the first batch with roofing tar. The tar failed. He plugged the second with a clay and cement mix a man at the hardware store made for him, after listening to the boy explain the problem for 10 minutes and deciding not to make fun of him. That one held. Then he found the pots were too small. A vessel that holds 2 quarts empties in a day and a half in July, and there is no point building a system that has to be refilled every 36 hours across 200 stations. He needed volume, and volume meant money he did not have, and this is where it nearly ended. It was Buster Rhymes, of all people, who solved it without meaning to. He mentioned at the stand one afternoon that a pottery outside Russellville had shut down, and there was a barn on the property full of seconds and rejects nobody had bought at the auction. Marlene drove him there on a Sunday. The woman opened the barn, and inside were hundreds of unglazed vessels, cracked, warped, off-center, unsellable, stacked to the roof. She let him have as many as he could load for $10. He set the first 140 in the ground between the tomato rows in February and March, a pot every 4 feet, buried to the neck, capped with a flat stone. His grandfather watched him do it and did not stop him and did not help him. That was the part that hurt. Cleophas had farmed that ground for 60 years, and he had a system, and it worked, more or less, and now he had a grandson digging 200 holes in the middle of it for a reason the boy would not say. He let it happen because it was February and the field was empty, and there was no harm in it, and because Marlene asked him to. But he did not walk out there. He did not ask. And Ellis, filling those pots one at a time with a 5-gallon bucket, 200 times, every 4 days, understood exactly what that silence meant. The first failure came in April. A buried vessel with a stone on top is a very attractive place for a mouse to fall into and drown. and a dead mouse in an irrigation jar will foul the water in every root within 3 feet of it. He lost the plants around 11 pots before he understood what he was looking at. He cut lids from scrap tin after that. The second came in May. He had set a run of 40 pots too shallow. The next sat proud of the soil, and the cultivator caught 8 and shattered everyone. The third came in June, and it was the worst. Because it was not a mistake. It was the truth arriving. He had 200 pots in the ground, and he was filling every one of them by hand. And it was taking 4 hours every 4 days, and the summer had not started yet. He was 10 years old, and he was carrying water in the dark before school. Marlene found him sitting at the end of a row one evening with his hands hanging between his knees, not crying, just sitting. She did not ask him about it. She did not tell her father. The dry spell broke over that county in the second week of July, and it did not let go until the middle of September. It did not rain. Not meaningfully, not once, for 9 straight weeks. The river dropped. The county went to mandatory restriction. 2 wells on the Layton Road went dry entirely, and the men who owned them stood in their yards and looked at their pumps and did not know what to do next. Buster Rhymes lost most of a 12-acre planting of tomatoes. He ran his sprinklers until the county told him he could not, and then he watched the vines curl and stop setting fruit and give up altogether. The Alderdice family, who had the best bottom land in that part of the county, salvaged maybe a third of what they planted. The roadside stands along the Natchez Trace shut down one after another through the first 2 weeks of August, and on a 38-acre rise above the river, in a field that everybody in Colbert County had spent the spring calling a graveyard, Cleophas Farrow's tomatoes were green, not surviving, not hanging on, green and heavy, and setting fruit in the second week of August in the worst dry spell in 22 years. The vines were deep-rooted and dark, and the leaves did not curl in the afternoon, the way every other tomato vine in that county was curling, because 4 feet from every plant, 18 inches down, sat a buried clay vessel releasing water at exactly the rate the plant was pulling it out. Cleophas walked those rows on the morning of the 14th of August. He walked them slowly. He got down on his knees at one point, 71 years old, and dug back the soil beside one of the pots with his hands, and found what he had expected to find and had not let himself believe. Roots, a dense white mat of them, wrapped completely around the clay, holding it like a hand. He stayed down there on his knees for a while. Then he got up and found his grandson, who was at the pump filling the bucket for the 4th time that morning. And he stood there and watched the boy do it and said nothing for a long time. Then he asked him how much water the whole field was taking now. Ellis told him. Somewhere near a fifth of what the sprinklers had used, and none of it lost to the air. Cleophas Farrow looked out over that field for what Marlene later said was close to 2 full minutes. Then he said the only thing he said about it that entire year. "Show me where you want the rest of them and I will dig the holes." They put another 320 in the ground that autumn, the 2 of them, working together, an old man and a boy, in the field. They had both been standing in the whole time. Buster Rhymes came out in September and walked the rows with his hat in his hand and asked Ellis, without any preamble at all, where a man could buy pots like that. Prudence Vance lived to see the 3rd harvest. Ellis brought her a basket of tomatoes every August until she died, and she never once let him leave her porch without a book. Within 4 years there were buried vessels in vegetable fields all over that end of Colbert County, and the men who put them in did not call it a la irrigation, because none of them had ever heard the word. They called it the Farrow method, which was wrong by about 2,000 years, and which nobody ever bothered to correct. There is a line from Wendell Berry that has always seemed to belong to what happened on that farm. The care of the earth is our most ancient and most worthy, and after all, our most pleasing responsibility. Ellis Farrow did not invent anything. He found something that had been working for 20 centuries, and that the modern world had walked straight past because it was slow and quiet, and did not look like progress. He read it in a book an old teacher put in his hands, and he believed it enough to dig 200 holes in his grandfather's field, while everybody he knew laughed at him. The pots are still down there. They are still doing exactly what they were doing on the day he buried them. Nobody laughs about the graveyard anymore. Have you ever kept working at something after people decided it was foolish? Tell us about it in the comments. We read them all. And if this story meant something to you, subscribe and tell us where you are watching from.